Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about 3 small box games. And this is, it's just in time for summer, it's just in time for traveling, and 2 of these were supplied for review, these 2 guys right here. This one we bought with our very own money, but regardless, all of the thoughts in this video are all our own.
So let's kick things off with Courtisans.
In Courtisans, players compete to manipulate the Queen's Court. You start the game with 3 cards each and 2 goals that will guide who you want to be in favor. And then, each turn you play your 3 cards, always playing 1 in front of yourself, 1 in front of any other player, and 1 into the court, either above the table to try to put that family into the Queen's good graces, or below the table to try to make them fall from grace. There are also 4 special cards. Nobles count as double. Assassins can remove a card from their area. Guards are protected from assassins. And spies are played upside down and only revealed at the end of the game. The game ends once the deck is empty, which is when all of those spies are flipped. Then any cards you have that match families in favor are worth a point. Any that are part of families that have fallen from grace are worth -1 point. You add all of these points to any goals you have achieved, and the greatest manipulator is named.
So Courtisans is really a mean card game. Everything you're doing is mean, but that's what also makes it interesting. Is I usually don't like it when people mess with my things, but if that's the whole point, then I'm on board and I'm just as bad as everybody else. And it makes you do it too, because you have to play a card in someone else's domain. You don't have a choice, and you're definitely not going to give them something helpful.
Well, it's nice because sometimes you have to give them something helpful, and that's worse. That feels worse. So like at first in this game, I feel like the first couple rounds when you play with new people, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry to give you this. And then when the game gets going a little bit, and now everyone has like knifed everyone else in the back, then you've got that thing gives them 3 points, and you're like, I really don't want to give you this, but I guess I have to. And that's really fun. And it's like 20 minutes. So it is super mean, but it's so fast. And it's just so constant, like everyone's screwing with everyone all the time. And so I think that is why it's fun.
And it is interesting because I think it's tempting to put the people that you get into the bottom part of the table, because a lot of the goals I think have to do with having the families that aren't in favor. And so there was a time when like most families only had members below the table, and at one point we all like, oh, we actually want to score some positive points and try and like switch it up.
Yeah, we definitely found that in the last game that we played that was a 4-player game, and yeah, everyone was doing that at the start because everyone wants to fulfill those goals right away, and then you're like, oh, wait a second, I've got like 4 greens. I really need some greens above that table. And so that is fun. And a lot of the stuff too can really, like, even though you can see what's happening, and that person who's going last feels like maybe they've got a bit more power than everything else, but also because you've got all of those spies out, and you end up with a lot of spies out, it's fun that right at the end of the game, you're flipping all those cards, and then it's that big like, oh, like that's a positive or a negative. And yeah, it really is a surprise, and it really swings things quite a bit. And I forget what I put down too, so it's a huge surprise to me. I will say that this is a better game with more players. So we've played it a few times at 2, and it worked better than I thought it would at 2, for sure. But at 2, that other card you're giving always going to the other person. So it's still the choice of what card do I put in the middle, what card am I taking, what card am I giving them. So there still is really a choice, and it is still like an interesting quick game. But at 4 or at 5, that dynamic is so much more interesting because it's so much more of that like, okay, who screwed me over last time? Who do I think's doing best? Who do I think's doing worst?
Yeah, and speaking of the cards, they look great, and I love that there's like the gold foil on them, and then the like tapestry board. The tapestry board looks lovely. It does take a while before it lies flat though, but overall component-wise, I think it looks really good.
Yeah, when you say it takes a while, we still don't know how long it takes until it lies flat. flat because it has not yet lied flat.
It's better than it first was.
It's better than it first was, yeah, but we're like 4 games in and it's still curling up at the ends. I think you got to like iron it, but we're not adult enough to have an iron, so we haven't been able to do that. But it does look really nice, and yeah, definitely everything looks nice. And you got 4 icons to worry about, so it's pretty easy to remember those. So this game, you can teach this game in like 3 minutes. Like it's so quick to play with new people.
Yeah, so in terms of who it's for, it is for you can bring new gamers on easily. It's for people who like quick card games. It's for people who are okay or who even like really like mean games as well. And because it looks good too, it's just a nice one to introduce for that reason as well.
I would say though that you're probably going to get more out of it if you're generally going to play this with 3 to 5 players. You can like at 2, you'll play a few games at 2, you'll like it okay at 2, but you want to mostly be playing it at those higher player counts, I think, to really get the most out of it.
And that's Courtisans.
In Seaside, players compete to draft the best Seaside. To do this, each turn you grab 1 chip out of the bag, choose a side, and play it. If it is a blue chip, isopod, crab, or shell, you put it into the central C area and draft again. And you can keep doing this as long as you draw blue chips. If it's a white chip, you have to stop. If it's a sandpiper, you can grab as many isopods as you want from the middle and make a stack. But it has to be the same size as your other sandpiper stacks, or the smallest one is lost. If it's your second rock, you grab all of the crabs from the middle, plus steal one from an opponent. If it's a beach, you grab as many seashells as you have beaches. And if it's a wave, you flip over one of your beaches and then do whatever's on the other side. You take turns pulling and playing until the bag is empty. Then whoever has the most beaches gets everything left in the middle, and everyone counts all of the chips in front of them. Whoever has the most is the winner.
The best part about Seaside is how it looks. I love this like beach bag, and the tiles look amazing, and it says it's water resistant, not waterproof, so you can play it at the beach but just not in the waves.
Yeah, and it's windproof though, which is I think the big selling point, because when you're playing games outside, we lived in New Zealand for a while, you can play anything outside. But it was like, even here, when we play with card games outside, you really got to watch those cards because they're going to blow away. Scotland, not the best place for outside cards. But this, because they're like chunky wooden blocks, it is great for that. Yeah, and that's kind of its big selling point, right? Is that this is meant to be played at the beach. This bag, I cannot overstate the thickness of this bag. And this bag feels like it's got to be waterproof. It's like canvas, but it's crazy. And yeah, and the pieces are lovely. All of the parts are lovely. And I think that really is the biggest selling point for sure.
Yeah, the game itself is pretty simple. And I would say it definitely works better at more than 2 players because there is a push your luck where you're putting things into the center and trying to get a lot of what you want to collect and hope it pays off. And at 2 players, because your turn is every other turn, I feel like you're in less danger of losing all of the stuff that you're working towards putting out.
Yeah, definitely. When we played this with more players, it really does feel like if I keep pulling out stuff, because you can keep pulling out stuff, sometimes you can pull out like 7 or 8 of the ones that go in the ocean, of the middle ones, of like the 3 little creatures. And when you're pulling those out at 2, I'm like, well, I know Jess wants crabs. And so I've pulled out a few crabs, that's okay. I'm gonna pull out a ton of isopods and I'm gonna swallow those up. But when you're playing with other people and you're pulling those out and then you get like something you didn't want at all, you get like a wave that you're just putting down, you're not doing anything with because you don't have any beaches. You're putting 1 beach down, you're getting 1 shell or something like that. Then it's like, oh no. So that pusher, like you really feel it because you don't know if it's gonna come back around to you. With 2 people, you put a whole bunch of 2 things in, you're probably gonna get the one they don't take. With 4 people, you put a whole bunch of 3 things in, you might get none of those things. It's going to come back to you and just be empty. So I really do enjoy the pusher luck a lot more with 4. It's a very simple game though.
Yeah, it is quite a simple game, and I do feel like it's one that I feel like the first player has an advantage because there aren't a set number of tiles that each person is pulling out. But I don't know if that's even true, just because of the luck of how you're pulling them out. You could be that you're only ever pulling out a couple, not some other people are pulling out lots.
And it could be that the first player is really just feeding the other people a whole bunch of stuff, because the first player is just going to fill stuff. So I don't know if I think there's a first player advantage. I do think, though, that this is going to be one that is going to be more for either newer players or for people who are cool with just bringing like a beach game that knows what it is, right? Like this is meant to be ultra simple. And so this is that. This is like that kind of mind-free, you've got a drink on the beach and you're kind of half playing, you're half chit-chatting kind of thing. This is not a main event. This is not gonna take up your whole brain. Even while you're playing it, it's not gonna take up your whole brain. It's very light. So kind of set your expectations at that. But if you're okay with something that's just super light, like this isn't gonna compete with sea salt and paper, but if you're okay with something super light, then this does do that job.
And this is one I do want to take to the beach and play, but we have had a really cold summer here so far, so we have not had the opportunity.
It's not officially summer yet, though. It's just late spring, just a cold late spring.
But let's move on to our final game, Faraway.
In Faraway, players are traveling through the island of Alula and trying to map its ever-changing lands. To do this, players start with 3 cards in their hand and a row of cards to draft from. Each turn, everyone simultaneously chooses 1 card to play in front of themselves. If you play the lowest numbered card, you get to draft your next card first. If your card is higher than the previous card you played, you choose a sanctuary card. The purpose of all of this is, of course, to score points, and cards do this in various ways, including some that score for the color or time of day of the other cards you have out. Others need various icons to be present in order to score. After 8 rounds, players flip all of their cards face down, and then starting from the last card that they played, they flip them over and score them one by one. The tricky thing here is they only score in relation to the other visible cards, meaning anything played afterwards or sanctuaries. Once everyone has scored all the way back to their first card, final points are tallied and the greatest explorer is named.
So this is one that I think is our most played game so far this year. Part of that is that it takes like 15 minutes to play a game at 2 players, so you can play a lot of games in an evening, and it's so addictive. It's a game that it takes you 1 game to figure out because of that scoring backwards. So the first time you play, you're gonna likely put cards out in a way that you end up with like very minimal points. But then right away, you're like, oh, I want to play that again. I think I get it now.
Yeah, everyone we've played it with definitely did that. When Jess says it takes 1 game, I think it took me 3 or 4 games to get my head around that, because you put out the cards and you can see the other cards. And so you think, oh, I see that, so that's going to connect to this. You just forget. And that backwards scoring, it's so smart, because that's really, like, that's what makes this game different. But it's one of those mechanisms that you're like, how did no one think of this? Like, surely this already exists, because all you're doing is flipping those cards over and then flipping one backwards and then looking around at what's there. And how much that breaks your brain of just flipping that and like, wait, I know I had like 2 other pineapples. Oh, right, my pineapples are still flipped down because I don't get to those yet. And it really does take a few plays, but yeah, once you kind of play it more and more and you find those combos and you just find those different routes as well, because there are shockingly a lot of routes in this game.
Yeah, definitely. There was a while there where I could have sworn that the 10 points for having 1 of each color was broken, and then that was the way to go. But you're absolutely right, because if you can get one of those ones that is like 5 of 1 symbol that scores big and be able to pull that off, that can be huge. And another thing too is there are some games when I'm barely collecting the bonus card for having them in chronological orders, and yet that works out because of the other symbols I'm playing. But other times I am so dependent on getting those cards to get the extra symbols that I need. And that's my main thing I'm doing, is just making sure I'm putting them out chronologically to maximize my chance of getting those.
Yeah, it's really clever because the low cards, so the cards that want you to put at the cards that you really want to put at the beginning of your line because they're going to help you be chronological, those ones score you no points. Those ones are just giving you things, so you really need to put those later. And then the high cards that get a lot score all the points, but they need all the things, so you're never going to get those chronological bonuses. It seems like every single game there's like a path, and then there's other paths that branch off those paths no matter what other people take.
Yeah, and I would say I don't think it feels too different at different player accounts. I really like this at 2 players because it just plays really quickly, and I always just feel like I'm trying to beat my best score usually. Like when I can get a high score, I feel good about like, ooh, I feel like that's really good. And like we look at the app and we compare it. Whereas at more players, the thing it introduces is there is more to choose from if you're earlier. So that's a bonus, but it's not like getting in each other's way or affecting each other.
Right, I'm definitely trying to beat your score. I am 100% trying to beat the other people at the table. I don't know. I don't care about my high score. I care about beating everybody else. But yeah, it is really good at 2 players. I think actually, unlike the other 2 that we just talked about, I think I prefer this at 2 players. Just because we get to play more, we get to fit in more games, we get to play quicker.
Yeah, I would say that it just does take a little bit to score, particularly at more players. So that is one part where you get to the end, and then that end can sometimes like feel as long as the game itself. But it's really interesting because someone will be like 0, 0, 0, you're like, oh, you didn't do very well. But then they'll be like 20, 15, 10, you're like, oh no!
Yeah, the scoring, because you flip them and like reveal them, there's kind of this like magical reveal each time you do it. So it is interesting, but you're right. The scoring takes, comparative to the game, the scoring takes a good chunk of time. So you got to be okay with that. But I find it interesting. Like it's not boring scoring.
But who this is for, I think this has the widest audience because I do think you can bring new gamers in, especially if they're going to be okay with like having a couple of like practice learning games. But it also, I think, has enough, like it's just different enough to that a seasoned gamer who enjoys a quick card game like Sea Salt and Paper and other staples, I think would enjoy this too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. There are these card games that just kind of get accepted by the full game community. And this kind of fits that like clump of games where I think everyone thinks, oh yeah, that's pretty solid. That's a solid game that I think is going to end up in a lot of backpacks at a lot of conventions and get played a lot. We brought it to the last convention. We played it with like every group we sat down with.
Yeah, it was our go-to, and every single person we played it with really liked it. I don't think there was a time when we introduced it to someone that we didn't immediately play again. And those are our 3 small box games. Please let us know in the comments what your favorite ones you're playing right now are. And as usual, please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.